He thought it was just another orchard raid, until the bear turned toward him, holding something in its mouth that wasn't an apple. Officer Mark Hensley was finishing his early patrol when the radio crackled. Report from Mill Creek Orchard. Bears sighted near the east fence again. He sighed. It was the third call that month. Apple season always brought the same problem. Hungry bears wandering too close to the farms. As he parked by the fence, the morning mist clung to the trees. A faint rustle came from deep inside the orchard. The ground was scattered with half-eaten apples, each bite marked with teeth too large for any local wildlife except one. Mark gripped his tranquilizer rifle, moving slowly. The orchard smelled sweet and damp, mixed with something musky, unmistakably bear scent. Then a soft huff broke the quiet. He froze. Through the mist, the shape of a brown bear emerged, larger than he expected, its fur glinting with morning dew. But it wasn't alone. Two small cubs tumbled behind her, chasing rolling apples as if they were toys. Mark's grip loosened slightly. This wasn't an aggressive raid, it was a family feeding. Still, he whispered into his radio, "Female bear, 2 cubs, no aggression yet." He raised his tranquilizer not to shoot but to watch through the scope, gauging her movements. Then one cub tripped, squealing. The mother's head jerked up, eyes locking directly with his. For a moment they simply stared, 2 protectors, one of children, one of land. He didn't pull the trigger. The cub squeaked again and the bear turned to nudge it up gently. That tenderness struck him harder than any fear could. He lowered the rifle, whispering, "You're just trying to feed them, aren't you?" Suddenly the radio crackled again, too loud. The bear's ears twitched. She rose on hind legs, alert and massive. Mark's heart pounded. Mark didn't move. The bear's breath puffed in short clouds as she sniffed the air, trying to locate the sound. He slowly reached to turn down his radio volume. Behind her, one cub had begun climbing a low apple tree. The other gnawed on a bruised fruit, oblivious to the tension. The officer had handled black bears before, but this one, a cinnamon-faced grizzly, was far from typical in these parts. That alone could mean trouble. He whispered, "Easy, girl." The bear huffed and dropped back on all fours. Instead of charging, she began to drag fallen apples into a small pile. The cubs gathered around. Mark frowned. Is she collecting them? He lifted his camera, required for field reports, and snapped a few pictures. The shutter sound made the bear glance his way again, but she didn't advance. Then from the far end of the orchard, a truck engine roared. The farmer, old Henry Cole, was arriving early. "Damn it," Mark muttered. The sound startled the cubs. One bolted toward the fence, the other clung to its mother's side. The bear turned sharply, torn between the two. Mark knew the danger. If the cub reached the fence line while the truck approached, panic could turn fatal. He ran, waving his arms toward the truck, shouting, "Stop! Don't move the truck!" The engine rumbled closer. The bear gave a warning growl. Mark turned. The cub was tangled in the wire fence. And the mother was already running toward it. Mark sprinted faster than he had in years. The cub's cries were high-pitched and desperate, tangled in the rusty wire that divided the orchard from the nearby field. The mother bear's heavy paws thudded across the ground behind him. "Easy, easy," he shouted, not sure if to the bear or himself. He reached the fence first, knees hitting damp soil. The cub's fur was wedged between twisted metal, and one tiny paw was bleeding from the scrape. Mark slipped off his gloves, fumbling with the wire. Behind him, the mother bear stopped just 10 yards away, chest heaving, growl low and trembling. If she charged, he wouldn't even have time to raise the tranquilizer. He didn't look back. "It's okay, little one. You'll be free in a second." He worked fast but careful, trying not to make sharp movements. The cub whimpered, tugging weakly, blood mixing with dew. Mark gritted his teeth and twisted the wire apart. The cub slipped free, and in the same heartbeat, the mother lunged forward. He froze, instinct screaming to run. But she didn't hit him. Instead, she barreled past, wrapping her snout around the cub and pulling it away from the fence. Mark stumbled backward, heart hammering, watching as she sniffed the cub's paw, then began licking the wound, slow, deliberate, tender. Something about that sight struck him harder than the adrenaline. A mother, scared out of her mind yet so careful. He whispered, "You're just like any mother." The bear turned, her golden eyes meeting his. They held that gaze for what felt like an eternity, the air alive with something that wasn't fear anymore. But then the truck engine roared again from the distance. The bear stood upright, alert. The cubs pressed close to her legs. She huffed once and the sound rolled like thunder across the orchard. Mark turned to wave frantically. "Henry, stop. Don't come closer." The farmer cut the engine, but it was too late. The noise had scared them. The bear's muscles coiled, her eyes darting to the open slope beyond the orchard. Mark knew that look. She was about to bolt, and if the cub's paw was still hurt, it wouldn't keep up. He grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, we need a relocation team, Mill Creek Orchard, now. She's got injured young." Static crackled. Then silence. The signal was dead. The bear nudged her cubs toward the slope, limping cubs stumbling behind. Mark clenched his jaw and followed at a distance. "You can't make it far like that," he muttered. The bear paused once at the treeline, looking back. For the briefest moment, their eyes met again, not as predator and protector, but as two guardians caught in the same fragile world. Then she disappeared into the forest. Mark exhaled, lowering his rifle. He'd have to track them before nightfall, or they might never be found again. The forest swallowed him whole within minutes. Mark stepped through the broken orchard fence and into the dense undergrowth, flashlight in hand, rifle slung but safety on. The air smelled of wet pine and apples gone sour. Behind him, the distant hum of the farmer's truck faded into silence. The ground was soft from morning rain. Every few feet he found fresh prints, a mother bear's wide paws and beside them two smaller sets. He crouched to study the tracks. The cub's left paw print was shallow, uneven. Injured one. He followed slowly, trying to make as little sound as possible. Each step cracked twigs, whispered leaves. The deeper he went, the darker it grew, branches knitting above like a cathedral ceiling. He wasn't supposed to follow alone. Protocol said to wait for backup, keep distance. But he couldn't leave that limping cub to stumble through thickets with open wounds. A sudden call of a raven broke the quiet. It startled him, and something else. Up ahead, a low rumble rolled through the trees. Mark froze, switching off his light. Through the gray dimness, he spotted her, the mother bear, standing halfway up a slope, looking back. The cubs were behind her, one limping, the other hiding under her chest. He crouched, barely breathing. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you." The bear sniffed the air. Her ears twitched, then she huffed softly, not the warning kind, but one he recognized as cautious acknowledgement. Mark took a slow step forward, then stopped. "You remember me, don't you? I didn't shoot." For a moment she didn't move. Then, surprisingly, she turned her head away and kept walking up the slope. Mark followed at a careful distance, keeping her within sight but never too close. As he climbed, the air thinned, cool and sharp. Rays of light pierced through gaps in the canopy, flashing gold on wet moss. Halfway up, he saw it, a small pool of water collected in a hollow rock. The cubs drank, but the injured one whimpered with every movement. He whispered, "You're not going to make it far like that, little guy." He knew what needed to be done. Tranquilize them gently, call for transport, relocate them deep into the protected reserve. But getting close enough without triggering her instinct? Nearly impossible. He watched her lower her head, nuzzling the cub's paw, licking the wound again. It was bleeding less but swelling. Mark felt his chest tighten. "You're treating it the only way you know how." The scene reminded him of his own daughter when she scraped her knee last summer, crying until her mother wiped the blood away, whispering, "It's okay, I've got you." He swallowed hard. We all protect what's ours. Then, a snap of a branch echoed from behind him. He turned sharply, raising his light. Two glowing eyes reflected from the shadows, not the bear's. He stepped back, voice low. "Who's there?" A second pair of eyes appeared beside the first. Coyotes. 3 of them, lean and hungry-looking, watching from between the trees. Mark's pulse spiked. The bear hadn't noticed yet, too busy tending her cub. If they came closer, she'd fight, and that injured cub wouldn't survive the chaos. He whispered, "Not today." Raising his tranquilizer rifle, he aimed into the dirt just ahead of the coyotes and fired a warning shot. The hiss of compressed gas and the soft thunk of the dart hitting the ground sent them scattering. But the noise did something worse. The mother bear whirled around, growling deep and furious, mist bursting from her nostrils. Mark slowly lowered the rifle. "Easy. That wasn't for you." She took a step closer, cubs squealing behind her. The silence after that felt eternal. Mark didn't move, didn't breathe. His hand trembled near the trigger, not to attack but to protect. Then suddenly a new sound broke through, the faint chirp of his radio. "Mark, do you copy?" The bear's ears perked. And in that fragile second of distraction, the injured cub slipped, tumbling down the slope. The sound of the cub tumbling was brief but violent. A thud, a squeal, the roll of loose rocks. Mark didn't think. He threw his rifle over his shoulder and slid down the slope, boots skidding on damp earth. The cub had landed near a cluster of ferns, crying softly, its tiny body trembling. A smear of blood streaked across one side where it had grazed a root. Easy, easy, Mark breathed, crouching low. The cub tried to drag itself upright but whimpered with every attempt. Above him, the mother's roar echoed, raw, powerful, terrified. The kind of sound that made the forest itself pause. Mark looked up and saw her silhouette against the dimming light, massive, frantic, peering down at him. He raised both hands, palms open. "I'm helping. I'm not hurting it." She huffed, pacing along the ridge. The other cub cried beside her. Mark's heart hammered, but instinct took over. He moved slowly toward the injured cub, unclipping his jacket. "It's okay, little one." The cub didn't resist when he wrapped the jacket gently around it. Its breathing was shallow but steady. He lifted it carefully, every muscle tense, aware of the watchful eyes above. "Don't make me regret this," he whispered. He turned to look up the slope again. The mother had vanished. Panic surged. No, 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 where? A rustle behind him. He spun around, and there she was, just 10 feet away. She had come down. Her fur bristled, breath harsh and steaming in the cold air. Her eyes locked on the jacket in his arms. Mark froze, every nerve screaming. "It's okay. I got your cub. You can take it." He crouched, lowering the bundle gently to the ground. The cub squeaked faintly, reaching out a paw toward her. The bear inched closer, sniffing the air. Each breath sounded like thunder to him. Mark didn't move. He couldn't. Then, in one careful motion, she extended her snout, nudged the jacket aside and pulled the cub close. She inspected the wound, huffed softly, then looked up at him again. This time the gaze was different, not wild, not hostile. It was wary, yes, but laced with something almost acknowledging. Mark whispered, "Go on. Get them safe." He stepped back, slow and deliberate, never breaking eye contact. The bear picked up the cub by its scruff and began to move up the slope, the second cub trailing behind. Halfway up, she paused and turned, just long enough for one silent heartbeat, before disappearing into the forest shadows. Mark stood there, trembling, his hands shaking from both adrenaline and awe. The forest went still again, except for the faint whistle of wind through the branches. He sat down on the damp ground, letting out the breath he'd been holding. "You're something else," he murmured. He pulled out his radio. Static. He climbed higher until the signal returned. "Dispatch, this is Officer Hensley. I've made contact with the bear family. Injured cub, light wound. Mother relocated herself toward Northern Ridge. Requesting team for post-track verification." The radio crackled back. "Copy that, Mark. Stay put. Back up in 30. He looked toward the ridge where she'd gone. The trees swayed gently as if closing behind her. He thought it was over. But as twilight deepened, another sound reached his ears, a faint whimper from farther uphill. Mark frowned. No, there were only 2 cubs. He grabbed his flashlight, heart tightening again. "Don't tell me." He climbed toward the sound, branches scraping his sleeves, until the beam of light caught movement in the underbrush. There, tangled in thick vines, was a third cub, smaller, weaker, ChatGPT said. Barely moving. Its fur was matted with mud, one paw twisted unnaturally beneath it. The poor creature must have been separated during the climb, unnoticed in the panic. Mark dropped to his knees. Hey, easy now." His voice cracked slightly. The cub blinked up at him, weak and confused, giving a faint whine that cut straight through him. He reached forward carefully, testing the vines. They were wound-tight around its leg, thorns biting into the skin. "Hold on, little one," he whispered, pulling his pocket knife free. The blade caught the light from his flashlight, trembling slightly in his hand. Every sound felt amplified, the wind through the leaves, his own breathing, the cub's shallow gasps. One by one he sliced through the vines. Each cut drew another soft cry, but he murmured reassurances, his voice barely above the rustle of the forest. When the last vine snapped, the cub tried to move, and failed, collapsing against the soil. Okay, that's it. "You've done enough," Mark said, sliding off his outer flannel and wrapping it around the small body. "We'll fix this." He lifted it gently. The weight was barely anything, but his arms ached with the weight of what it meant. A choice. If he carried it back, the mother might not accept it again. But if he left it here? The forest had gone silent, utterly still. Even the night insects had quieted. Somewhere far up the slope, a faint growl echoed, distant but deliberate. Mark froze. "She's looking for you," he said softly to the cub. "We'll get you back." He started uphill again, slow, methodical, flashlight beams sweeping across moss and shadow. The growl came again, closer this time. His heartbeat rose. He could feel the pulse in his throat. Then through the trees he saw movement, her. The mother bear, half hidden behind the curve of an ancient oak. Her chest heaved, fur streaked with earth, her breath fogging in the cold air. Mark stopped, lowering himself slightly to show he wasn't a threat. "I found your other cub," he said quietly, though his voice trembled. "It was trapped." The cub stirred in his arms, giving a weak cry. The mother answered instantly, a deep, resonant rumble that wasn't anger this time. It was recognition. Mark set the bundle down on the forest floor, hands open, palms forward. "Go on," he murmured again. "He's yours." The bear stepped forward, slow and uncertain. Her size seemed even greater in the flashlight's edge, a shadow made flesh. She reached the cub, sniffed, then licked the mud from its fur. The cub whimpered once, then nestled against her leg. For the second time that evening, Mark witnessed something wordless and ancient, a bond that didn't need translation. The mother looked up at him once more. The silence between them was long and it felt sacred somehow. Then, with a low huff, she turned and disappeared into the dark, her 3 cubs trailing behind like small moving shadows. Mark stayed where he was, his flashlight trembling in his hand, catching the last glimpse of her fur vanishing into the trees. His voice came out in a whisper. "That's it. That's all of them." He sat back against a rock, exhaustion sinking in, rain starting to fall again, soft, hesitant drops that caught in his hair. And as thunder rumbled far away, he realized, this wasn't just a rescue. It was a crossing. A moment where fear had turned to trust, if only for a heartbeat. He looked toward the church steeple faintly visible through the trees, the same one whose bell the bear had once rung. A small, incredulous smile tugged at his lips. "Guess you really were trying to tell me something, weren't you?" Lightning flashed, and in that brief white glow he thought he saw a shape move once more in the distance. The mother bear had stopped again, watching him. Then came the faintest sound, a single metallic clang, drifting from the direction of the church. The bell. Mark's breath caught in his throat. The bear had vanished into the forest, yet somehow the bell was ringing again. Mark's pulse spiked as he took in the sight, the tiny cub struggling, its soft cries fading into the dusk. "Easy there, little one," he murmured, lowering himself to the ground. The vines were twisted tight around its midsection, pinning one paw at an awkward angle. Every movement it made only tightened the trap. He knelt beside it, slipping the flashlight between his teeth and reached for his knife. "Hold still, buddy. I'm not gonna hurt you." The cub flinched as the first vine snapped. Mark froze. "No sudden moves," he whispered, working slower this time. He'd done this before, freeing deer caught in fences, fox kits from traps, but this was different. The air carried the bear's scent, strong and fresh. She wasn't far. Each cut brought a muffled cry from the cub, but soon the vines loosened. Mark peeled the last one away and leaned back as the cub tried to stand, wobbling on uncertain legs. Its tiny muzzle lifted, sniffing the air, searching for its mother. Mark's throat tightened. "She'll come back for you. She has to." He turned off the flashlight and crouched in silence, waiting. The forest hummed softly, crickets, the faint rush of wind through pine needles, the far-off drip of water. Then a branch cracked. Mark looked up. 2 glints, eyes, reflected the faint starlight from the treeline above. The mother bear emerged slowly, her silhouette vast and deliberate. Behind her, the 2 cubs he'd seen earlier shuffled along, curious but cautious. Mark swallowed hard. "You came back," he whispered. She grunted low, not aggressive, more like a deep, steadying breath. The little cub squeaked, stumbling toward her. Mark stepped aside to clear the path. The mother bent down, nudged it gently, then pressed her muzzle against its fur. A sound like a sigh escaped her. She was checking it, recognizing it. For a few long moments, mother and cubs huddled together under the trees. Mark stood motionless, not wanting to interrupt something that felt ancient and sacred, a reunion as old as life itself. When she finally lifted her head, the bear looked at him once more. Her eyes caught the faint beam of his flashlight, gold, calm, almost knowing. Mark whispered, "You're welcome." She huffed softly and turned, leading the cubs back into the forest. Their shapes dissolved into the shadows, swallowed by moonlight and mist. He waited long after they were gone, just listening, the distant crack of branches, the rhythm of the forest returning to peace. Then he exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face. 3 cubs, he muttered, shaking his head. Always a surprise with you. He clicked the radio again. Dispatch, update, all accounted for. Cubs reunited. No further action needed. Copy that, officer. Good work. As he hiked back to his truck, the night air cooled his sweat. The orchard stretched out behind him, glinting faintly with dew. In the distance, he thought he saw a shadow pause at the edge of the treeline, broad shoulders, watchful eyes. Then it vanished. Mark smiled to himself. Guess we're even now, he said quietly. He climbed into his truck, started the engine, and drove off through the winding dirt road, the forest whispering in the dark, the stars reflected faintly in the orchard pools. Behind him, somewhere deep among the apple trees, a low, contented rumble rolled through the night, the sound of a mother bear settling her cubs beneath the roots of an old tree. And for the first time in days, everything in that wild corner of the valley was still again. Dawn crept over the valley in thin bands of gold, filtering through mist and dew. The orchard shimmered with early light, every apple glowed faintly in the morning haze, every leaf still wet with night's breath. Mark parked his truck by the fence line, stepping out with a thermos in hand. His boots sank slightly into the damp earth. The air smelled of soil, fruit, and something wilder, the faint, lingering musk of bear. He stood there for a long moment, scanning the treeline where the family had vanished hours earlier. Nothing moved. Only the sound of a jay somewhere overhead calling through the branches. He took a slow sip of coffee. Sleep hadn't come easy. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the cub's face, scared, tangled, helpless, and the mother's eyes locking with his just before she disappeared into the dark. At the station, the reports would sound routine. Bear and cubs relocated safely. No property damage. But out here, he knew it had been something else entirely, something that couldn't be written in bureaucratic language. He heard a car approaching and turned to see a county vehicle rolling up the dirt path, the green antenna seal of the Department of Wildlife gleaming on its side. A woman stepped out, ranger uniform, sun-faded cap, clipboard in hand. "Morning, Mark," she called, her voice light but edged with curiosity. "Morning, Dana." She surveyed the orchard, then looked at him. "Heard you had quite a night. You good?" "Fine," he said, handing her his thermos with a grin. "Coffee's cold, though." She laughed softly, then grew serious. "So, tell me about the cub." Mark described everything. The call, the orchard damage, the separated cub, the mother's return. Dana scribbled notes quickly, nodding as she listened. When he finished, she let out a low whistle. "You're lucky," she said. "That could have gone bad fast. Most mothers don't let anyone that close to a cub, even by accident." Mark shrugged. Didn't feel like luck. Felt like she understood. Dana looked at him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. Maybe she did. They walked together down to the broken section of the fence. The soil showed fresh prints, big ones. Dana crouched, tracing the pattern with her finger. "They were here all right," she said. "Looks like the cubs came through again before dawn. Probably heading east. I'll have the team mark the trail for tracking, just to be safe." Mark nodded but stayed quiet. He didn't want them chasing that bear family too far. They deserved to vanish into the mountains, not get tagged and tranquilized. As if sensing his thought, Dana said softly, "We'll just monitor. No collars, no stress. Promise?" He smiled. "Thanks." They walked back toward the vehicles. "You know," Dana said, "this orchard's getting more traffic from wildlife every season. Bears, elk, even a cougar last month. You might consider talking to the landowners about installing motion lights or fruit fencing." "Already did," Mark said. "Most of them think the bears just look cute. Until they show up." Dana laughed. "They'll learn." She looked out at the mist rolling off the orchard rows. "Still," she added, "not every story ends this clean. You did good work, Mark. You gave that family a chance." He didn't respond. Just looked out across the glimmering field, where sunlight had begun to burn through the fog. For a moment, he thought he saw 3 dark shapes at the edge of the forest again. Small, playful, tumbling through the tall grass before disappearing into shadow. He blinked but they were gone. A crow cawed overhead. The world was moving on. He turned back to Dana. "Let's check the stream next. If they're heading east, they'll follow the water line." She nodded, climbing into her truck. "Lead the way." As Mark started his engine, he glanced once more at the orchard, quiet, untouched now but full of echoes. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the bears were finding their way home. And deep down he knew that what happened here would ripple beyond this valley, a reminder that even in the wildest moments coexistence wasn't just possible. It was necessary. The radio crackled softly as they drove off into the morning light. Dispatch, Officer Mark reporting, beginning follow-up patrol. Area stable, bears relocating naturally. He smiled faintly and eased the truck forward, the orchard shrinking in his mirrors as the forest opened before him once more. By mid-morning, the forest had woken in full, alive with the hum of insects, the flutter of wings, and the faint dripping of last night's rain sliding from branch to branch. The air was cooler beneath the canopy, thick with pine and the sweetness of moss. Mark drove slowly along the narrow dirt road, eyes flicking between the track ahead and the woods on either side. Dana followed close behind in her own truck, her radio crackling every few minutes with updates from the monitoring station. When they reached the point where the orchard's eastern fence gave way to forest, Mark stopped and got out. His boots crunched softly against gravel and fallen needles. "This is where they came through," he said, pointing at the soft earth near the ditch. The prints were unmistakable, 3 smaller ones clustered together, and a larger set leading ahead. The cubs. And the mother. Dana knelt beside the tracks. "Fresh," she murmured. "Maybe 4 or 5 hours old." Mark nodded. "They stayed close to the stream last night. Probably followed it uphill." He looked around. The slope beyond the stream was steep, littered with ferns and stones slick with water. Somewhere above, a raven croaked, echoing through the trees. For a few minutes they moved quietly, scanning for broken twigs or fresh scat. Then Dana stopped and motioned him over. "Mark," she whispered, "you might want to see this." On a flat rock beside the stream lay 2 half-eaten apples, the same kind from the orchard, their red skins glistening wet. Around them, tiny muddy paw prints circled like signatures. Mark smiled softly. "She brought them for the cubs." Dana grinned. "Looks like even bears do breakfast picnics." But Mark's expression soon turned serious. He crouched, brushing the mud gently. "They didn't eat much. Could be nervous. Could mean something spooked them." They followed the stream upward, each step careful. The forest grew denser, the kind where sound changed, muffled, close, every rustle amplified. Then Mark froze. A shape hung from a branch up ahead, something metallic glinting faintly in the light. He approached slowly. It was an old, rusted snare trap, tangled in vines. Illegal, forgotten, but still menacing. Dana's face darkened. "Poachers? Or fruit thieves?" Mark said grimly. "Either way dangerous." He carefully disarmed the snare, coiling the wire around his glove. "If that bear had stepped here last night?" He didn't finish. "You didn't have to." Dana exhaled sharply. "We'll log it. Maybe set a camera here." But Mark was staring past the trap, toward a patch of moss where claw marks raked across a fallen trunk. "Fresh." She was angry, he said quietly. "Or afraid." They moved higher, the sound of running water growing louder until it opened into a clearing, a shallow pool fed by a narrow waterfall, sunlight spilling across it like gold dust. For a moment it was beautiful. Peaceful. Then Mark noticed something near the bank, a small tuft of brown fur snagged on a root. He knelt, turning it over gently in his hand. "Cub fur," he murmured. Dana frowned. "You think it's injured?" Mark shook his head. "Maybe. Or maybe the cub just brushed against it. Hard to tell. But something didn't feel right." He scanned the tree line again. The silence was too complete. No birds. No rustling. Only the steady fall of water. "Let's pull back," Dana said, voice low. "We've gone far enough for now." Mark hesitated. Then he nodded. "Yeah. I'll come back tonight with the night cam. See if they return." They started down the slope, their boots sliding slightly in the damp soil. Just before they reached the trucks, Mark stopped. He could feel it, that quiet, almost electric awareness that meant they weren't alone. He turned slowly. Between 2 fir trunks, barely visible in shadow, stood the mother bear. Her head was tilted, eyes calm but alert. One cub peered from behind her leg, the other clung to her side. They weren't running this time. They were watching. Waiting. Dana froze. "Don't move," she whispered. Mark didn't. He just raised one hand slowly, palm open. No threat, no fear. The mother bear blinked once. Then with a low huff she turned, guiding her cubs back into the trees. For a long time neither Mark nor Dana spoke. Finally Dana exhaled. "She wanted you to see they're okay." Mark nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "She wanted me to stop worrying." He looked into the forest once more, where sunlight still caught the edge of fur before fading completely. Then he whispered, half to himself, maybe some goodbyes don't need words. The forest wind carried his voice away. But far beyond the ridge, a faint echo answered, a low, almost gentle growl fading into the wild. Night fell heavy and slow across the valley, pressing a hush over the orchard. The air was thick with the sweetness of ripe fruit and the damp smell of soil cooling under the stars. Mark sat alone in the cab of his truck, parked near the same orchard fence where he'd first seen the paw prints. The headlights were off, only the soft amber glow of the dashboard clock marked the passage of time, 11:47 p.m. He was waiting. He'd set 2 night vision cameras along the north fence, one facing the fruit trees, the other covering the trail that led back into the forest. Dana had offered to stay, but Mark insisted she rest. If they come, they won't come with 2 of us here, he had said. And she'd understood. Now the orchard felt different, quieter than any night before. Not peaceful quiet, but expectant. Like the earth itself was holding its breath. Mark reached for his thermos, the metal cold in his hand. He was just taking a sip when the motion sensor blinked faintly on the monitor beside him. Something had triggered camera 1. He froze. Slowly he leaned closer to the screen. At first, only branches moved, leaves shimmering faintly in the infrared glow. Then from the shadows a shape emerged. The bear. Her broad shoulders rippled under moonlight, her fur slightly damp, glinting silver where the dew caught the light. 2 smaller shapes followed close, the cubs bounding lightly at her side. Mark's pulse quickened, but he didn't move. He watched through the cracked truck window as the mother bear crossed the orchard fence with a gentle heave, her paws sinking softly into the earth. The cubs trailed behind, one pausing to sniff at the base of the post where Mark had hammered a small metal tag earlier, wildlife protected area. The cub tilted its head curiously, then pressed its nose against it, leaving a smudge of damp breath. Mark smiled quietly. That's one way to sign it, he whispered. The mother bear moved deeper among the apple trees. She wasn't tearing branches or breaking fruit, she was simply walking, slow, measured. Every few feet she would stop, sniff the ground, and look back to her cubs as if showing them something. It took Mark a moment to realize what she was doing. She was teaching them, the safe path, the boundary between the forest and human ground. He reached for his camera, recording through the open window. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from awe. Then, something unexpected happened. The bear stopped near the center of the orchard, directly beneath the same old apple tree where the first damage had been found days ago. She rose on her hind legs, reaching up to a low branch, and plucked an apple carefully in her jaws. She turned her head and dropped it, right at the base of the tree. Then she looked toward the truck. Straight at him. Mark's throat tightened. He whispered softly, "You're returning what you took." The cubs came forward, sniffed the apple and then, obediently, followed their mother back toward the fence. For a long moment she stood there, framed by moonlight, the curve of her shoulders strong yet calm. Then she huffed softly, not in warning but in acknowledgement, and disappeared into the trees. Mark sat there long after they were gone. The orchard rustled faintly in the wind, a few apples dropping to the ground. The night felt lighter somehow, not emptied but eased. He stepped out of the truck, walked to the tree and looked down at the apple she had dropped. It was whole. Untouched. The skin still glistened with dew. For a reason he couldn't explain, he didn't pick it up. He just left it there. When Dana arrived the next morning, she found Mark already awake, sitting by the tree with a calm expression. "They came," he said simply. She blinked. "You saw them?" Mark nodded. "She brought an apple back. And left it here." Dana stared at the fruit, speechless. "That's not possible." Mark smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised what's possible when both sides learn where the line is." He looked toward the forest where the first morning light was spilling between the pines. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a cub's playful cry echoed faintly, a soft, fleeting sound of life continuing in its rhythm. And for the first time in weeks, Mark felt no need to follow it. He knew exactly where they were, and that was enough. Morning light rolled across the valley like slow-spilled honey, soft and golden. Mist still clung to the lower slopes, weaving between the apple rows and the forest edge. It was one of those rare quiet dawns. No engines, no chainsaws, no voices. Only birdsong and the faint hum of wind through leaves. Mark stood by the fence, hands resting on the cool metal rail. The apple still lay beneath the tree where she had left it, a small red shape against green grass. It hadn't been touched all night. For a moment he wondered if he should move it, maybe pick it up, take it to the cabin as a reminder. But something in him resisted. Some part of him knew it belonged right where it was. Dana approached from behind, her boots crunching on the gravel path. "You didn't sleep, did you?" she asked, her tone gentle. Mark smiled faintly. "Didn't need to." She followed his gaze toward the apple. "Still there?" He nodded. "Still there." For a while neither spoke. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was comfortable, like two old friends who didn't need to fill the space with words. Finally Dana broke the quiet. "So what now? You gonna set more cameras? Keep track of them?" Mark shook his head slowly. "No. I think this is where it ends. They know the orchard now, they know it's not theirs but not forbidden either." He took a deep breath, the scent of apples and earth filling his lungs. "Sometimes the best thing we can do is leave space, just enough for both sides to breathe." Dana smiled. "You sound like one of those nature documentary narrators." Mark chuckled softly. "Maybe I've spent too long listening to the forest." She tilted her head. "Or maybe it finally started listening back." They walked slowly between the trees. A few apples had fallen overnight, their skins split open by dew and gravity. Bees buzzed lazily around them, drinking sweetness from the cracks. Life feeding life without conflict. When they reached the old wooden gate at the orchard's end, Mark paused. A faint rustle drifted from the treeline, then another. He turned his head, eyes narrowing. Through the haze of light, he caught a glimpse of motion, a large shape moving slowly uphill. Brown fur shimmered briefly before melting into the green. Then two smaller forms followed, bounding beside her. The mother bear and her cubs. They weren't sneaking this time. They weren't afraid. They were simply passing through, along the ridge line, heading deeper into the wilderness where the stream curved and the trees grew thick and wild. Mark didn't move. He didn't raise his camera. He just watched, a small smile playing across his face. The mother bear paused once at the crest. The light caught her eyes, calm, deep, understanding. For a moment, their gaze met across the open space. Then she huffed softly, turning away, and disappeared into the wild. It felt like closure but not an ending. Dana exhaled quietly beside him. "They're really gone." Mark nodded. "For now. But they'll be back next spring. When the apples bloom again." She laughed softly. "You sound sure of that." "I am." He looked toward the horizon. "That's how these things work. You share a place for long enough, it remembers you." A long pause stretched between them, filled only by the breeze rustling the branches overhead. Then, in a voice softer than the wind itself, Mark said, "Maybe that's the promise of this orchard, to be shared, not owned." Dana smiled and touched his shoulder gently. "Then I'd say the promise is kept." They stood there a moment longer, until the mist finally lifted and sunlight washed the valley clean. As they walked back toward the trucks, the camera near the fence clicked quietly, a timer Mark had forgotten to switch off. It captured a final still image, two human silhouettes framed against the orchard's edge, the apple glowing faintly at their feet, and far in the background, a bear's outline dissolving into morning light. That single frame would later become one of the station's most watched clips, the wildlife officer and the bear in the orchard, a story of respect. Viewers would leave thousands of comments. Some about coexistence, some about faith in small miracles, some simply about the quiet beauty of a shared world. And in his next video upload, Mark's closing words would be simple but heartfelt. "Sometimes nature doesn't need saving. Sometimes it just needs space to remember who it is, and who we can be." He'd pause, smile at the camera, and add softly, "If you've ever had a moment in nature that changed you, share it below. And remember, respect the wild and it'll respect you back." Then the outro music would fade in, gentle piano over birdsong, as the final shot lingered on that apple under the old tree, still untouched, still shining softly in the sun.